All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Divine Nine Education Roundtable with Dr. Monifa McKnight, our Interim Superintendent from Montgomery County Public Schools. We are going to kick our program off. I will turn the mic over to President Brooke Holmes to start us off.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. As stated, my name is Brooke Holmes. I am the president of the Potomac Valley Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, SORO.
And I am Lynn Miller-Rowe, president of the Montgomery County, Maryland Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated.
It is our esteemed privilege to welcome all of you to this event, the Divine Nine Education Roundtable with Acting Superintendent of Montgomery County Public Schools, Dr. Monifa McKnight. This education forum will focus on the following areas of interest: educational equity, unfinished learning, and restorative justice, to name a few. We would not be before you today if it were not for the foresight of the event coordinators. We are grateful to the Educational Development Committee from the Potomac Valley Alumni Chapter, co-chaired by Dr. Christy Hay and Yvonne Van Lowe, who also serve as leads for this event. As well, our Public Relations Publicity Committee, chaired by Joan Brown and co-chaired by Amanda Washington. And from the Montgomery County Alumni Chapter, we extend gratitude to Sora Barbara Boney, who serves as the first vice president, Jacqueline Denard, Dr. Keisha Addison, and Joyanne Courtney. Lastly, we extend our gratitude to the 12 additional chapters of the Divine Nine organizations represented in Montgomery County and who are participating in this forum with us. They will be introduced a little later. SORO, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sora Holmes. And let me just say that the Montgomery County, Maryland Alumni Chapter was thrilled to have had an opportunity to collaborate on this most important event with our sister Delta chapter in Montgomery County. But even more thrilling for both chapters this evening is the opportunity to present to some and introduce to most our Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Eastern Regional Director, Sora Rosie Allen Herring, who will bring greetings this evening. Sora Allen Herring.
Thank you so much, Sora, and I thank both you as well as Sora Holmes for your dynamic leadership. And to all of our guests here today, we certainly welcome you and we thank you for your partnership. So on behalf of all of the chapters of the dynamic and historic Eastern region of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, it is indeed a pleasure, and I thank you for all that you do. I do want to thank Dr. McKnight for her awesome leadership, and I know that it is absolutely unprecedented. While many of us, no one had a crystal ball to see COVID coming. And when we found ourselves in the moment, no one could have anticipated that it would last as long as it has. But we know that with our Divine Nine brothers and sisters who are all working in this community, who are doing phenomenal work, we thank you for going on this journey tonight with us, but most importantly, for the journey of doing the work in our community every single day. So to my brothers and my sisters, and I see you here representing your respective sororities and fraternities, we thank you. Because of you, we have a collective body that ensures that this work is happening in our community. So yes, Dr. McKnight has quite a bit of a challenge ahead of her. I live in this community as well, so I understand what she's going through and watching from afar, and just know that at the end of the day, we do appreciate her. And so while we find ourselves at this moment and recognizing the topics that will be on for discussion tonight, we know that there were many challenges before COVID. These challenges are not new to our community and to our children. They were simply exacerbated by COVID. And so the opportunity for us to have this conversation tonight, to show our support for Dr. McKnight, but also to show our commitment to each and every one of you, our Divine Nine brothers and sisters, for this collective journey that we will take to try to bring thought leadership solutions to some of the toughest challenges. Thank you again for being with us tonight. Know that you have my absolute appreciation, and I look forward to hearing more of the discussion. Thank you so much, and please, everyone, be well.
Thank you. Sora Boney.
So Boney, I think you may be still muted.
Oh, sorry about that. My name again is Barbara Boney, and I am a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, Montgomery County, Maryland alumni chapter. And I am here tonight, and I have been given the pleasure of introducing our Divine Nine Educational Roundtable participants for this evening. And I'm excited about this opportunity. First, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Jason Otchley. And he's with Alpha Phi Alpha Iota Epsilon Lambda chapter. Welcome. And then second, Miss Michelle Gill, Alpha Kappa Alpha Theta Omega Omega chapter. Welcome. Dr. Arla J. Bentley, Alpha Kappa Alpha Psi Sigma Omega chapter. Welcome. Mr. Henry Hellstock, Kappa Alpha Psi Gaithersburg Rockville Alumni Chapter. Welcome. Mr. Victor Barkley, Kappa Alpha Psi Silver Spring Alumni Chapter. Dr. Lorenzo Prillman, Omega Psi Phi Nu Chapter. Welcome. Miss Lynn Rowe, Delta Sigma Theta, Montgomery County, Maryland Alumni Chapter. Welcome. That's my president too. I have to say that. Next, Miss Brooke Holmes, Delta Sigma Theta, Potomac Valley Chapter President. And then Mr. Robert Brown, Phi Beta Sigma 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 Chapter. Welcome. Miss Jane Chappelle, Phi Beta Sigma, oh sorry, Miss Jane Chappelle, please forgive me, Zeta Phi Beta Eta Phi Zeta Chapter. And Dr. Yamaya Hampton, Sigma Gamma Rho Eta Iota Sigma Chapter. Welcome. And last but not least, Bertha Barlew, National Panhandle Council, Montgomery County, Maryland. Welcome, welcome panelists. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, First Vice President Barbara. Really appreciate the introductions. My name is Yvonne Van Loo, and I'm a member of the Potomac Valley Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. I, along with Dr. Christy Hay, will serve as your moderators for this roundtable discussion tonight. As you heard, we are focusing our discussion on several key topic areas. So we're going to focus on 4 topic areas. Those topic areas are unfinished learning or learning loss, education equity, student well-being, and restorative justice. We will ask Dr. McKnight to share general comments at the start of each topic, and we will follow her comments with specific questions by our panelists. So we hope you enjoy the conversation. If you have questions that you'd like to contribute, you can always put those in the chat. I will now turn the virtual mic over to Mrs. Brenda Wolf, President of the Montgomery County Public Schools Board of Education and proud member of the Montgomery County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, to introduce Dr. McKnight. Following her introduction, Dr. McKnight will share brief introductory comments, and immediately following her comments, we will begin with our first topic, unfinished learning and learning loss. Mrs. Wolf, I'll turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Yvonne. Good evening. I'm Brenda Wolf, proud member of Montgomery County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, and also president of the Montgomery County Board of Education. I'm also joined tonight by a few of my colleagues out there in Zoom land. Dr. Daka is on. She's an AKA. Miss Evans is an AKA. Miss Mandrowski and Miss Harris. It is also my pleasure to introduce you to our interim superintendent of Montgomery County Public Schools, Dr. Monifa McKnight. Dr. McKnight has had a distinguished career as an educator since 1999. In fact, all but 3 of her 23 years have been in Montgomery County. So this is truly where she's grown up as a teacher, an educator, administrator, director, deputy superintendent, and now interim superintendent. I work closely every day with Dr. McKnight, and I could attest to her drive and expertise to do what's best for all of our students, families, and staff, especially during this pandemic. Dr. McKnight has led the return to in-person learning with a determination to not just have our students survive the pandemic, but to ensure they will prosper or thrive by providing them with an educational experience that will prepare them to be college, career, and community ready. She's confident, passionate, and collaborative and experienced. She has a clear vision and the skills to back it up and do whatever it takes to meet the diverse needs of our students and staff. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Monifa McKnight.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wolf. First, I will say it is so nice to walk into this environment tonight that just seems absolutely warm. It takes me back to my days of coming into my sorority and being met with warmth and support. I first want to say good evening to the Divine Nine and other members of the listening audience. I'm aware that many are joining us virtually, and we are glad that you are here. I am Monifa McKnight, the proud interim superintendent of Montgomery County Public Schools. Ms. Wolf, I want to thank you for your introduction. Ms. Wolf mentioned that we do work together daily, and she is absolutely right. This pandemic has brought us closer, in so many different ways, to constantly be relentless about thinking about what the needs are for our students and our staff in this environment of COVID-19. And so working closely with President Wolf and all members of the Board of Education has been essential during this time. And I just want to take a moment to applaud them, because I have had an opportunity to work in other districts. I have colleagues that work in many other places across the country, and to have a board that is steady and focused on making sure that all decisions are decisions around the needs of our students and serving them the best way possible definitely is their core value. So I want to thank them for their support and their commitment to that. I also want to thank many who are here tonight. Your Eastern Regional Director, Rosie Allen Herron, for Delta Sigma Theta Leadership Incorporated of Potomac Valley Alumni Chapter, for hosting this educational forum of the Divine Nine. I thank you so much. Ms. Holmes, the president of the Potomac Valley Alumni Chapter, Ms. Rowe, the president of Montgomery County Alumni Chapter. Again, tonight is happening because of the commitment of many. I actually had a chance to meet the co-chair, Ms. Van Lowe, just a couple of months ago, and she approached me and said, would you be interested in having a conversation about education? I said, absolutely. And so here we are, just a couple of months later from having that conversation. So I do want to thank you, Mrs. Van Lowe, and Dr. Hay, for extending the invitation to me and for collaborating with my staff to make sure we made tonight happen and that we would engage the audience throughout the evening in such an important conversation. I also want to recognize my sorors who are here serving on this illustrious panel of Divine Nine representatives this evening. Sorors Dr. Arla Bentley and Michelle Gill and Linda Wright. So thank you so much. I appreciate them and every panel member here that is here this evening. As I look across the screen, I'm reminded of the relationships that I've been able to build in Montgomery County over the years. Many of you have worked side by side in establishing mentor programs in schools, developing opportunities for our students to receive scholarships across our district. And so when I look across the screen, I see friends that I've had an opportunity to work with over the years in the name of providing the best service that we can for our students together. And that's really important, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about this evening. How do we continue to meet the needs of our students in our community together? Because the work that's ahead of us is work that cannot be done in isolation. I also see we have a number of members here tonight from the staff, but I know that we have 2 MCPS team members, Dr. Keisha Addison and Dr. Lorenzo Perlman, who are here and on the panel as well. Anyone else that I did not name, I apologize, but I'm glad to have you here, and I look forward to us engaging in the dialogue this evening. Before I get started, I always begin this way because I think it's important for you to know me, not only who I am as the interim superintendent, but as a person. So I will just quickly share a few important points and details about myself so that you know who I am. I did arrive in Maryland 23 years, actually 20 years ago, but I was born and raised in Orangeburg, South Carolina. Very small town. If you listen closely, you may hear some influence from Charleston, South Carolina, which is not far from Orangeburg. But I was raised in Orangeburg by a strong mother who worked in public schools, and she taught my sisters and my two older sisters and I that we must always have a commitment to every opportunity presented to us, and we must present that opportunity representing fierce work ethic. And that has stayed with me over the years. And every time I speak, I think it's important to elevate that because the work that we do has to be purpose-driven, and we always have to know our why. And here I am today in this role, thinking and reflecting all the time on how this is about a commitment to purpose and a service. We were a family rich in faith. We were very clear about making sure we knew our roles in the community and believing in the importance and value of education. And so, my mother made it very clear to us early on that we would be educated and that we had to think about what our role would be and how education would pave the path forward for us in the future. I'm also a proud graduate of South Carolina State University. That is where I pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. I went on to receive advanced degrees in education from Bowie State University, and I currently sit on the Board of Visitors at Bowie State University, and I graduated with my doctorate degree from the University of Maryland, College Park. So I end by saying my life has been one that's been purpose-driven, and that has been to serve others through public education, and I've done that for over 20 years. Yes, I did start my career in Newport News, Virginia before moving to Montgomery County, but the vast amount of my career has been spent here, including one pit stop into Howard County Public Schools for a little less than a year, and at the United States Department of Education. I had the opportunity there to serve as a principal ambassador under the leadership of John King, Secretary of Education at the time. So in all these school systems, in all of my roles as a teacher, a principal, an assistant principal, director, a principal fellow, chief of schools in Howard County, deputy superintendent, now superintendent, I have centered everything around the same purpose in life, and that is to positively impact the lives of children through education. And every day I'm reminded of that because I'm also a proud mother of a 9-year-old, Aiden McKnight, who I was blessed to have, and he is my absolute best teacher. He teaches me how to be a better parent from him every day, and he teaches me why the work that we do as educators is important, and it has to be personalized, and we must know the needs of every single child in our system. So I appreciate Aiden for his daily lessons, and my husband, who also is one who works in service and serves as a social worker. So I just wanted to start by sharing a few snippets about who I am. And for the rest of the evening, I want to say I look forward to our discussion and just really hearing how all of the thoughts and ideas and how we can collectively continue to work to support our community here in Montgomery County. And I know that while we are all here representing many different sororities and fraternities, it doesn't matter which one we belong to, as long as we all have a commitment to academic excellence and the service that we provide to our communities, which I know is our shared responsibility. So with that, I will stop because I can go on for a while talking about how important that is, but I know that we can do everything together as a community. So I will pause there and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight. Thank you for sharing those tidbits about yourself. It really helps to personalize and humanize you. But with that, we're going to jump right into our discussion. So our first topic area is unfinished learning or learning loss. So will you set the stage for us in terms of what is happening from this perspective of unfinished learning within MCPS? After you've done that for a few minutes, then we will go to our first question.
Absolutely. This is a topic we have been discussing all throughout this pandemic. Now more than ever, we have got to know exactly who is learning, who is not, and exactly what we're doing about it. Our dialogue tonight is going to focus on really some four major areas, I'll say, that are in very much alignment with the MCPS strategic plan and our priorities of academic excellence. And they are focused around the areas of well-being, academic excellence, well-being and family engagement, professional and operational excellence. And when we think about unfinished learning, which MCPS does call mitigating learning disruption, that is a very important topic particularly because when we went into the pandemic, and again, there was no notice to prepare for this. We had to end up closing our school buildings in March, and we did not return until a year later. That is a significant amount of time. And in a matter of 2 weeks, we also had to determine what it is that, how we were going to service our students, because we'd never gone to a format that required that we go to 100% virtual learning. And so our staff did an amazing job in addressing that whole dynamic of what are we going to do when our educational system has been disrupted in a way that we could not have imagined. So that was one area, but I also say there were a number of other needs that came up. You know, we had to think about not only academic needs, but also what we were going to do to meet students' basic needs. And when I say basic needs, I'm talking about food. Many of our students come to school every day looking for a hot meal because that's where they receive it. We had to think about their physical health needs. We were managing a pandemic. So not only were families concerned about their health, but also just the health that some students have cared for when they come into our school buildings. We had to determine a way that we would still meet their needs. Social emotional needs. Parents were losing their jobs. Our students were in some ways in spaces that they didn't have when school represented the safe space away from home, they did not have that. And so we had to work with our government partners to figure out how we would continue to address those students who we know were in very vulnerable situations. And technology, that became an immediate necessity for us to, on a basic level, be able to communicate. So when we really think about the priority to mitigate learning disruption, we really had to really go and go through the process and think about who is able to learn or who was able to learn when we went to a virtual format in March of 2020. And did this educational format work for students or did it not? And so that's why I will say the importance of looking at student data is really critical, and it's really important right now because we know that there is no replacement for in-person learning, but we also have to know what has happened as a result of the pandemic for students learning. African-American students, Latinx students whose performance in their data has historically been impacted by access and opportunity, they continue to be highly impacted due to the year of virtual learning. As a school system, we had to commit to address original issues that impacted access and opportunity for students, but that then were exacerbated during the pandemic. And those issues still remain there. So we really had to look at institutional barriers to that extent. And so really talking about what programs and support will be provide for staff that could provide what they needed for their students to be successful was really important. Making sure our parents had the knowledge and skills to be able to support their students. And most importantly, making sure we were providing ongoing opportunity and access for students to get that ongoing academic support that they needed outside of the school day. So I just named those as a few adjustments that we had to put in place and that we still are monitoring and implementing to make sure that we understand exactly what the impact of the pandemic has been on our student learning. And then most importantly, now that we know what the impact has been, what do we do about it?
Excellent. Thank you for that. So we're going to move to our very first question on this topic. Mrs. Ballou, you have the first question. You may ask your question.
My name is Bertha Ballou with the National Pan-Hellenic Council of Montgomery County, Maryland, serving as president and also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, serving under the leadership of Dr. Arla J. Bentley, Xi Sigma Omega chapter. It's an honor to be here to ask you this question, Dr. McKnight. What is it meant by learning loss or unfinished learning as it pertains to the coronavirus pandemic in 2020 and 2021? Maybe there's some folks on the platform that want a little bit more definition of learning loss and unfinished learning.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you asked that question because we are finding that there are many examples of a variety of terminology that's being used in so many different ways. And I do think it's important to be very intentional about the terminology we use. In MCPS, we use the term learning disruption. And we use that because students' learning was disrupted during the pandemic. And we use that to describe the impact on student learning as a result of not receiving in-person instruction in the traditional school setting. So that's how we define that. Our data revealed decreases in both literacy and mathematics compared to pre-pandemic performance. Before we actually brought our students in to begin assessment this year, we knew a few things. It's what we all know. The early years of students build that foundational time, particularly for literacy, in which they learn all the basic foundational skills of how to read, how to decode, word recognition, fluency, all of those skills. So we knew or predicted that there would be a greater impact on our youngest learners as a result of the pandemic. And we were correct. Literacy readiness for particularly Black and African-American students decreased in our evidence of learning criteria from 7.8% to a range of 38.2% in grades 2, 5, 8, and 11. So again, we saw more impact in our early learners, which we anticipated, and that's why we have to be very focused on exactly what we're doing to address those students in early learning and who were impacted by that year of virtual learning. Our students receiving farm services, free and reduced meal services, they were also very much impacted by this data. Our non-farm students, again, students who were not impacted, particularly in grade 2, we saw many trends there of them being impacted by their skills. And grade 2, I called out grade 2 because our students who are in second grade now, they essentially went through a full year of learning in first grade. And you know, first grade is when you again build a lot of foundation. And it was their kindergarten year that was originally disrupted by COVID-19. And so when we look at our second graders right now, we are looking at them and thinking about where were those pivotal points in which their education was impacted. And that has to continue to be a focus of us looking at our students, think about when their learning was interrupted and knowing who they are so that we're putting, most importantly, the right strategies in place for them. We're using 6 strategies, and I mentioned them earlier at the beginning to mitigate learning disruption, and I will talk more about them in this presentation. But those strategies really are focused on knowing who our students are, making sure their teachers truly understand their data. Third, making sure the time that's spent in the classroom now that our students are back in engaging in in-person learning is truly meeting their needs. And so that's why continuing to assess how students are doing is going to be really important, because we're going to have to see, based on the strategies that we are putting in place to address their learning needs, are they working or not? And then that's just one form of data. We also know that our students have to come into school to be ready to learn. And I must say the social emotional impact on our students throughout COVID-19 has been real. And so we do also have to spend a lot of the time in the classroom today, making sure that they are ready and it's a safe space for them to be able to learn, and removing any challenges that may make them think that it's not.
Thank you, Dr. McKnight. Our second question comes from Mrs. Jane Chappelle with Zeta Phi Beta. Jane, you may ask your question.
Good evening, Dr. McKnight. My question is, the most recent evidence of learning results revealed significant learning loss for Black children in math and reading in elementary school grades. How is MCPS working to remedy this issue?
Okay, so I am going to thank you for that question, and I'm going to tell you about the 6 strategies that we've been implementing to mitigate learning disruption. And then I'm going to talk specifically about how we have to have our staff prepared to serve all of our students. So the 6 strategies we're implementing to mitigate learning disruption are: 1, school improvement planning. School improvement planning has been in place for years in our schools, but now requires that we are even more intentional in every single school, and we have 209, of knowing exactly who is learning and who's not. And those students who are not learning, what are we doing about it? How are we responding to it? And the students who are learning, how are we continuing to accelerate their learning? So the school improvement planning process becomes pivotal right now, because it does require every single school know your students and know exactly how they are progressing or not, and be very intentional about what you're doing about the information that you have. Second strategy is literacy and mathematics instructional focus. So we know literacy and mathematics are foundational subjects, core subjects that really does lend itself to learning all of the other subjects that complement literacy and mathematics. So focusing on knowing how our students are doing in literacy and mathematics in all grades. Assessment of learning. Assessment of learning for learning is also our third strategy. So we come into this year, and I know there have been many conversations about students being over-assessed and there being time spent on students taking assessments when they come back into the school building. So I think that's really important to know that, yes, we can't just test students and it stops there. We have to figure out who they are and what impact we can have on them in their current situation and know what that situation is. But we also have to assess our students, because if we don't know what's happening as a result of their learning based on what we're doing, then we are not being accountable. Our primary role is to care for our students and their learning. And the only, again, way that we know whether they are learning or not is to be diligent to that process of assessing them. And so while I know there are a number of other priorities that we have in our school building right now, after COVID-19, we have to know. Because for those students whose learning have been disrupted and the learning loss has been exacerbated, we have to address that. And I'm not interested in us gaining any more wider gaps for our students, particularly those who were not learning as well or alongside their peers prior to the pandemic as a result of this pandemic. So that means we do have to assess of learning and for learning. The fourth strategy is acceleration of learning. I also believe that when we know where our students are, we have to address their needs. It should not be either or. In a school system, yes, if there are students who need more time, students who need more support, then we need to put those interventions in place to provide that. But those students who are going above, those students who have reading above grade level, we need to also meet their needs. And so again, it comes back to that pivotal question of we can only accelerate learning when we know exactly where the students are. But it is our priority to do that. Because if I have a student who is ready to go to the next level, who's ready to be exposed to a topic that they're not supposed to learn for another 2 years, but they're ready for it, then we can't hold them back. So that's the fourth strategy. The fifth strategy is tutoring and intervention support. So of course, we've talked about this a lot in our board meetings and our public conversations. We're providing tutoring and intervention for students who need it. And being able to make that learning personalized means that we have to know what are the specific topics that we are tutoring them on so that that time is making a difference. And professional learning of staff. Now I'm going to say this, the professional learning for staff is so important that none of the other strategies will work unless we invest in the learning of our staff. If you are in this webinar and you have a child or you've ever worked with a child, what you must know is that every child wants to feel, one, validated, and two, believe that they're working with people who believe in them. And so when we think about professional learning of staff, and particularly as it relates to having staff who can work and understand what the learning needs of all of our students, that means the staff have to know who our students are. They have to come into working with them with high expectations. They have to know my commitment is to the student and their learning. And that means I also have to know the student's family and not separate the student from never connecting with their family. And so all of those pieces become really important when we think about professional learning for staff, because not only are we teaching our staff the content that they need to know in order to be able to teach our children, but we also need them to be the adults that we need for our children. And so that becomes our responsibility, a great responsibility that we carry in making sure that we invest in our staff to not only know our students well, but most importantly, to serve them well. And so with that, I also say we've been very intentional about assessing where each student is academically and working collaboratively to support students in accelerating their learning so that they are at grade level or above grade level. And that commitment is on the forefront of everything we do right now as a result of the pandemic, because we can't go backwards. And as Ms. Wolf said earlier, the only way that we can do that and prosper is to make sure we're meeting that goal and we're not leaving any of our students behind.
Excellent, thank you. We're going to move in the interest of time to our next question. Mr. Victor Barkley, you have the next question. He's representing Kappa Alpha Psi.
Thank you and good evening, Dr. McKnight. Just a quick question, that is, how can fraternities and sororities of the Divine Nine collaborate with Montgomery County Public Schools to address the issue of unfinished learning?
Thank you so much for this question. And here's the good news. What we're talking about right now and ways that we can collaborate and support on this is nothing new to any of us. We know in all of our fraternities and sororities, we have committees focused on health, focused on education. That's why we're here having this conversation tonight. So our structure within our Divine Nine organizations says that we are committed to service. And I have a zillion ideas that I can share with you tonight about ways that we can work together, but I'll talk about just a few. As I said, because there are multiple ways in which you can help support students with unfinished learning. First, mentoring our children and the youth supports social emotional well-being, which does help with learning. I benefited from being a part of a mentoring group hosted by a sorority when I was in middle school. And I know many of you probably were, which is why we're all sitting here today, or a fraternity. But we know this was all about mentoring and support and having a child or a student see someone who believes in them and someone who is committed to them, building them to be the best that they can be. So mentoring is a critical way that I think we can partner together. I know that we can partner together to make sure that we are caring for our children within our community. So when you think about becoming a guest speakers or going into classrooms, and we can do that so much easier now virtually, so that our students can actually see you and see themselves, that's also another way. Students have to actually see models of success so that they can aspire to it. And most importantly, when they see it and then they're able to engage with that success, all of us on the screen, then it makes them even feel more connected to that opportunity for themselves. The third way I'll say is, we have many connections. I know we work in our fraternities and sororities, but we also have careers and opportunities. So when you think about internships, they are really important, have always been important. They're important because they provide real world experiences and provide support for career exploration. So if you are working with an organization or a company, and there's an opportunity for you to partner with us to provide an internship for our students, we want to be a part of that. We want you to partner with us on that. And offering programs for our students and families to support students' academic and social emotional development outside of the classroom continues to be important. Not all of these ideas have to happen within the school building. I am looking at Mr. Harrelstock because I remember years ago when I was a principal, we would go across the way here, right across the street to Montgomery College on Saturdays and work with our young men at the time who really needed that mentorship. And so I think we have to build on those programs that we've had and we've had in place over time and realize how important they are right now. And then I'll put in a plug for one last initiative that we have, and that's our out of school time initiative. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to hear conversations or be a part of our board meetings where we've talked about how excited we are to present this out of school time opportunity for our students. And it really couples with the importance of having the time to invest in staff. For every staff member in Montgomery County, I want them to know who our students are and how committed we are to our students being successful. And they are the conduit to that success. And so we then need time with the staff, whether it is a new teacher starting out in their career coming into Montgomery County or a teacher who may have been in Montgomery County for 10, 15 years. We want to remind them and work with them and support them and put the resources in place to help them understand when you work in Montgomery County Public Schools, we want you to know our students, be committed to serving them well. That takes time. And so as we create time to provide professional learning opportunities for our staff, our students still must be engaged on those days or those hours when our staff are busy doing that work, which makes them better for our students when they do interact with them. And so we are looking for every partner in our community, whether you are working in the arts, whether you work in music, parks and rec, whether you have an organization that's focused on community service, to let us know how your organization can come partner with us so that we can have a partnership that represents us having services available to all of our students and all of our schools on those days when we don't have school for students, but when we are spending that time professionally developing our staff. And I give you that example and that initiative because that really speaks to how we as a school system are going to be relying on our community partnerships to make sure we can then have that out of school time that is still engaging our students, that's still having them learning, and most importantly, having them work in the areas in which they are very interested in. So that's what I'll share with you. And I'd love to hear any current work happening in your organizations or within your realm of work and ideas that you have about supporting our students in their learning that could exceed beyond what I just shared.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and we will definitely circle back on that. We have one last question in this particular topic area that we want to get through quickly. So I'm going to ask Ms. Michelle Gill from Alpha Kappa Alpha to ask her question, please.
Okay, good evening, Dr. McKnight. We understand that tutoring has been identified as a mitigation strategy to address learning loss in Board of Education discussions. How will Montgomery County Public Schools implement tutoring programs in the schools to help address learning loss?
Okay, thank you for that. So our students are identified based on multiple measures, meaning we are going to use multiple forms of data to determine exactly what the student needs and what service is going to be most appropriate to support them. High dosage tutoring is used to help identify our students and those who need to accelerate their learning with grade level or above content. The staff uses the MCPS math and literacy curriculum so that our students also get consistency in those tutoring programs so that they're not learning content in the classroom that's different from what they're learning in those tutoring sessions. And the tutoring is provided in small groups for 60 to 90 minutes, 3 to 5 times per week. And I just have to give a shout out to some of our schools who have become very creative with how they're doing this. I was actually visiting an elementary school this morning, and they shared with me that for their tutoring program, again, under the leadership of that principal, they made a commitment and said that, yes, while we do have the option to offer virtual tutoring for our students based on our data in our school, we are going to commit to opening our school 1 hour early and provide the tutoring sessions in person 3 times a week. And I applaud that leadership from that principal and for that staff, because again, that's not something that they have to do, but it's something that they're committed to doing and they want to do. And most importantly, they're making the tutoring program work for their students and the needs at that particular school. So that's the type of differentiated support that I'm expecting, and attention to detail around how we are addressing this problem that I'm expecting all of our school staff to take into consideration as they plan.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So now we're ready to move on to our next topic area. So that next topic is educational equity. So Dr. McKnight, if you can give us a couple of minutes of what MCPS, where MCPS is with this. We have 4 questions again for you within this topic area that we will follow up with. So I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay. I'll begin by saying equity is and has been for years a core value in MCPS. And in essence, educational equity really does speak to our commitment to provide every student with what they need based on data that we utilize to ensure that academic success is not predictable by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. And that has been our commitment for years, and it still remains our commitment because our data says we still have plenty of work to do in that area. We created an all-in equity and achievement framework to address the issues of access and opportunities and to address disparities in our student outcomes as a result of truly some institutional barriers. In evidence of learning, we have multiple measures that we use that represent measures from the classroom, district, and external assessments to determine student progress at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. And we put that model in place because we have to ensure the goal of making sure that every student in our school system is college, career, and community ready. We also have the equity accountability model. The equity accountability model uses the evidence of learning to determine the impact schools have had on the progress of students in 5 identified focus groups. And those focus groups are African-American farms and non-farms, Hispanic and Latino farms and non-farms, and all other farm students. And then non-farms, white, and Asian student progress are also measured and monitored. And so I call out that equity accountability model because that speaks to the importance of making sure we are looking at the data and we are monitoring how well our students are doing or not and being responsive to that. And then the third part of the model is equitable access to resources. And this allows us to be able to examine how well the school system and our schools are using their staff, time, and money as measured by student outcomes to specifically address the needs in this, for our students in those 5 focus area groups. And I speak about that because the example I just shared about the elementary school and how they decided to truly use their CARES money, but be very specific and intentional about how they were using it to provide an in-person tutoring program an hour before school really speaks to the specifics. And then I would also mention our anti-racist audit. If you have not been able to join any of our webinars or watch any of our videos about it, I think it's really important that you are informed as a community member about that audit. As the deputy superintendent, I initiated this audit with an external consultant, really to have us look at a comprehensive analysis across all policies and practices in our school system to identify institutional barriers that may impede student success. And those areas, I'll call them out, are work diversity analysis, looking at working conditions and what are the progress and barriers of us having successful working conditions for the staff. Really looking at our pre-K to 12 equity curriculum review and really looking at our curriculum to ensure that it does teach updated information that is accurate, particularly related to the history and other aspects that we've heard from our students are really important to know. We also have a component of the audit, the equity and achievement framework, and looking at the progress of our students. The 2 other areas are also really important. One is community relations and engagement. During the pandemic, we had to figure out all types of ways to engage our community. This is where I elevate how important that partnership is, because we did not and cannot continue to do it alone. So continue to look at community relations and engagement is important. And then evaluation of school cultures. That last component gets at how it doesn't matter what school a student is enrolled in Montgomery County Public School, that school should be one that has a culture that cultivates high expectations and a culture of respect for every single student, regardless of who they are. And so those are the areas of our audit. And I emphasize that because it shows a commitment to us continuing to study and a relentlessness to eliminating the barriers that are impacting the progress of particularly our African-American and Latino students to ensure they have everything they need to be college, career, and community ready.
Great, thank you. So let's get to some specific questions. So Dr. Jason Otley, you have the first question. He's representing Alpha Phi Alpha. Dr. Otley?
Yes, good evening. Dr. McKnight, what strategies do you believe are instrumental in achieving equity and MCPS?
Thank you. So Dr. Otley, I'll say first, access and opportunity to courses and programs that reflect high academic standards are really important in achieving equity. If we don't have equity within how we look at access and opportunity, then we must assume that we are forgetting or leaving some behind. And that's not an option, nor should it ever be in a school system. Second, I'll say data and accountability must always be a part of how we monitor and analyze disaggregated student data. And I call out the disaggregated part because this helps us stay honest to making sure that we keep those high expectations that all of our students are performing. And if they're not, then we have to then ask ourselves why, who's not performing, and what are we going to do about it? And in many ways, we have looked at this far too long in terms of students of color being those who are not, when data is disaggregated, those who are not making progress in the way that we need them, and know that they can make progress. I'll also say a plan to address academic needs is one that must be made, but I mentioned this earlier. We get to true equity when we really build a professional learning expectation for staff that says we expect for our staff to have the capacity to provide valuable learning experiences for all of our students that are engaging, motivating, culturally proficient, and require that students demonstrate their understanding through real world application. And real world application is the part that I'll say has to be there, because when our students come into our classrooms, they have to know why this information is important and how it's going to help them when they leave that classroom, when they leave school, or in their future desires in their career or in their families, whatever it may be. And so that real world application is really important. And then I'll close by saying instructional planning time to plan, deliver, and evaluate lessons and student progress is key and must be a commitment for our teachers and staff moving forward.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Dr. Arla Bentley has our next question. Dr. Bentley represents Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority.
Thank you. Dr. McKnight, what implicit bias training is in place for all staff, and how is the staff held accountable for participating in the training and thereby demonstrating the behaviors learned?
Thank you for that question. So examining implicit bias was mandatory for staff in FY 2018, and they were able to take that training in person or online. We also have the interrupting implicit bias training, and in FY 2019, that was mandatory for all staff and was provided online. We also now have bias in hiring practices. And in FY 2020, this was piloted for anyone on a school interview panel. And so I highlight this one because this is a training that we put in place during the pandemic in 2020. And we thought this was really important because, again, getting to that point of who are we hiring and how are we hiring the best people for all of our students in Montgomery County, we need to make sure that everyone who sits on an interview panel is coming into that panel thinking about, is this person going to be the best person to serve all of our students? And if they are not in line or do not understand what it is that they are looking for, then they need to be trained on how to identify any biases that may exist in their thinking or in the practice of hiring. In 2021, we also had the Bridge for Implicit Bias to Anti-Racism, and that was mandatory for all 10-month and SEIU staff members, which represent many of our supporting services staff members, and it was recommended and suggested for all administrators. So the accountability is more indirect, and there are standards in our professional growth systems, and I call out our professional growth systems because the best way that we can hold our staff accountable is to make sure everything that we are teaching them is translated into their practice. And this is when our principals become really important and our supervisors become really important, because when it comes to observation of what we see in the classroom, how those classroom experiences are working for every student or not, or how we are even interacting in professional spaces, this is all really important to how we operate as a system. And so we look forward to continuing to implement those trainings. And we're also going to utilize data from our anti-racist audit to determine, I would say, any additional needs around implicit bias and other anti-racist priorities that we have not yet addressed in our training.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to move on to our third question in this segment. Mr. Robert Brown from Phi Beta Sigma has that question. Mr. Brown, you may ask your question.
Thank you, and greetings, Dr. McKnight. Here's my question. Is MCPS developing a curriculum to reflect the contributions of Black and Brown communities to math, science, English, and history?
Yes, thank you for that. And yes, MCPS and the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs believe in the importance of making sure that we have culturally relevant, inclusive curricula that does reflect our student population. And we know here in Montgomery County, where we have a very diverse student population, it's really important because all of our students need to see themselves in what is being taught to them. This is an important topic. I mean, it's infused that across all of our content areas and grade levels. And we currently also offer a variety of electives in our high schools to address this. I'll call out a few: African-American history, African-American literature, Latin American history. Those are all courses that we've put in place to make sure our students are becoming very familiar with their history and that they have very factual information, that they are being informed as students that they can carry into their futures. Our curriculum also are written with the lens of equity, inclusion, and anti-racism, and that is something that has to, again, continue to be a focus. When we think about selection of curriculum and how we implement curriculum into classroom, we consider the specifics, like make sure the texts are provided by diverse authors around very interesting and relevant topics that our students are interested in. We have to highlight the contribution of scientists and historical figures of color in our curriculum. And that can't start actually when we get into, when our students get into high school. They need to see examples of greatness in diversity and how that reflects who they are early on when they're really truly establishing a sense of self themselves. And every time they see someone who represents an image of who they are and who they could be, and the earlier they see that, the better. So we also work closely with our curriculum vendors. I actually was at a conference one and met one of them, and they came up to me, and it was a proud moment when they said, your staff is really serious about making sure that what we provide to them is diverse. They've given us feedback that have allowed us to go back and rethink some of our lessons and resources that we're utilizing. And I remember thinking, wonderful, not only are we impacting changes in curriculum and working with our vendors for MCPS, but for all children. And this is exactly what it has to be about. Recently at a board meeting, we also shared some of our pilot programs and courses that we have put out in our system for our students. And just to name a few, we were talking about science, but we have analysis of equity and identity in STEM, really important. Ethnic studies is there, Holocaust studies, introduction to social justice. We have many of our students trying to figure out what their leadership and voice should be around the topics that are important to them. We have a course by the name of Shakespeare, Race, and Gender. So again, all of these courses are courses that we've developed internally and provided for our schools to be able to engage students in a variety of ways to continue to build and broaden their perspective, and most importantly, have them engage in topics that they're interested in.
Excellent. I love hearing those opportunities. Our final question in this section comes from Dr. Lorenzo Perlman from Omega Psi Phi. Dr. Perlman, you may ask your question.
All right, thank you. All right, good evening, Dr. McKnight, panelists, and also attendees. I have the next question pertaining to educational equity. How are the school principals held accountable for the success and failure of student achievement and progress?
Thank you, Dr. Perlman. And I love that you're asking this question as one who actually sits in our administrative ranks in schools, because you know exactly how important this is. Student and school performance is and must be monitored by the Office of School Support and Improvement throughout the year. And so that is our office that really focuses on principal supervision. And in that office, we have our directors who are the directors of learning achievement and administration. We call them DLAAs, and the area associate superintendents. And their role is to be able to provide direct supervision of the principals and monitor the progress of the principal's leadership through the school improvement planning process. That is their primary job and role in that office, to do just that. And we also know that our principals are evaluated each year, and they're evaluated on 10 leadership standards of the professional growth system. And the school improvement planning is one of those areas that are very closely attached to that. Every principal is expected to know how well their school is serving the needs of every single student within their school building. That has to be very personalized. And so our leaders are very critical partners in this work tonight as we talk about mitigating learning disruption, addressing the needs of students and families as a result of the pandemic. The principal truly does serve as a conduit to leading the staff to knowing exactly how to do that. So their leadership is really critical at this time and very important. And so that's why we put everything in place that we can to make sure that they have the support and are very clear on the expectations.
Good deal. Thank you very much. So we're going to transition now to Dr. Christy Hay. She'll take it from here, and she's going to take us through the social and emotional well-being section, as well as our restorative justice questions and sections. Dr. Hay.
Thank you, Yvonne. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Christy Hay, and I'm a member of the Potomac Valley Alumni Chapter. And I am thrilled to continue the second part of our D9 roundtable discussion with Dr. McKnight. Social and emotional well-being is our next section. And Mr. Henry Hailstock from Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, you may ask your question.
Thank you. Good evening, Dr. McKnight. It's a pleasure seeing you again. As you alluded to earlier, our children and families have experienced significant trauma since March of 2020, including social isolation, food insecurities, chronic stress, physical and emotional abuse, illness, and death of family members. These traumas impact a child's ability to learn. how is MCPS addressing social, emotional well-being of all students? And how is MCPS identifying and supporting children in need of social, emotional support during the school day?
Thank you, Mr. Hillstock, for that question. MCPS immediately recognized that social emotional well-being of students and staff had to be a priority during the pandemic. We had people very concerned about contacting COVID-19, but then we also know that many of our students experienced death. Some of them lost multiple family members, and all of this happened when we were not together in person. And so when it was time for them to come back into school, we knew that students who left us back in March would not be the same students in many ways who returned to us. We also know that families experience trauma through not only illness and death, but financial, food insecurity, and other stressors. So many families had to regroup, move, make changes because they lost their jobs and all the other things that came along with the pandemic. And so knowing that the needs became very great, again, we partnered with so many others to help us address this, but we also made some internal changes about how we were supporting that we actually still have in place now. Some of these structures that we put in place during the pandemic when we were still virtual. One is the student well-being team. At each school, there is a student well-being team, and their primary responsibility is to monitor student well-being, and they respond to referrals for both the student and the family support. If a student is lacking something, we may provide it for that student, but it also shows us that there is a need within the family. And so that student well-being team becomes critical in that role. As we develop the student well-being team at each school, we also thought about who are the important people to have on this team that already have established relationships with families, who they see as trusted individuals, who they can actually reveal needs and other impactful situations that may have occurred that they may not so easily do with others who they have not connected with. And so being very intentional about who the staff members were that we put on the team to serve these families were important. We also had staff participating in summer training to plan for the return of students and really spent some time thinking about what we would do to anticipate the challenges and how we wanted to be prepared in every single building for what those challenges would be. So connecting with the families, providing that summer training for staff to be prepared for students to come back really became important because it wasn't just about how we caring for their learning, but how we caring for who they are as individuals now that they are returning to us after many changes may have happened in their lives as a result of the pandemic. We also have the curriculum that we have titled Leader in Me, and it's a social emotional learning curriculum. And this year we actually implemented it in selected school clusters with the goal of ultimately having this program implemented in 100% of our schools by the year of 24 and 25. And I'm so excited about it because while we don't have all of our schools who have adopted the Leader in Me curriculum that really focuses on social emotional learning, I mentioned earlier today I went to a school. And so some of the schools who don't have that curriculum yet, they're still using other programs that we use. One here, and I know you probably can't see this, but I'm going to hold it up because I had it right here on my desk from the visit earlier. This is the zones of regulation. And it works so well with our elementary students because it gives them the language and the tools that they may need when they identify themselves as being in a zone, like the blue zone or the green zone or the yellow zone or the red zone. And then they actually have an opportunity to share when I'm in this zone, how am I feeling and what happened that has me in this particular zone feeling this way. So I think that's important because when we really work with our students, and particularly our younger students, communicating their thoughts and feelings is really important to the process of helping them. And so we have to be able to give them the language and the structure of how to do it. So I'm really proud of our schools for implementing the Leader in Me, and those who are not even implementing the Leader in Me yet, establishing other programs like the Student Zones program. We also are partnering with many other agencies as we've had to do throughout the pandemic. And at the top of the list is Department of Health and Human Services, we have partnered with them to be able to provide additional supports for our students and families, and providing them with the things that they need so that the family structure is taken care of, so that the students, when they come into school, they are prepared to learn. And then, of course, we are increasing the number of mental health professionals in the school system. I am thrilled that we are onboarding and hiring 50 new social workers within our school system to help have a menu of services available to families and what they need within our schools, so that our families don't find it cumbersome to have to go to many different agencies to provide those needs for their families. So those are just a few things that we are doing, and I look forward to us continuing to be able to expand these partnerships beyond the needs of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, and thank you for that response. It was very insightful to learn about the things that MCPS is doing intentionally when it comes to the social and emotional well-being of students. And we have another question in this area for you, and that comes from Dr. Yamaya Compton from Sigma Gamma Rho. Dr. Compton, you may ask your question.
Thank you. My question is, what is the role of counselors in elementary, middle, and high schools? And does every school have a counselor trained to support the social and emotional well-being of children?
Thank you so much for that question. The role of the counselor is to provide the MCPS comprehensive school counseling program to all students. So when we place counselors in schools, we have a particular comprehensive program that we expect to be implemented for all of our students, so that we can be proactive in teaching them how to build relationship, how to be active citizens, regardless of the grade that they're in school. And our counselors help us to do that through implementing that curriculum. The counselors provide information to students and families about academic programs and opportunities, so that families can access those resources that they need. The counselors inform families about community resources. Counselors also support students in their transition from one level to the other. Some students find transitions easier than others. Most importantly, we have to have someone in that building who know who those students are and who can transition easily and who cannot. So they help support students in that way. Our counselors, they truly, I call them the heartbeat of every single school, because they have to have that relationship with the students, so that the students feel it, with the staff, so that the staff feel supported, and with the parents as a trusted individual at the school who is helping to develop their students as they come in. And so when we think about all of these roles of the counselors, they're busy and they're doing a lot. So can you only imagine how their roles have transformed during this pandemic in so many different ways, now that they are also addressing many more challenges for families through working with the students and trying to be as proactive as they can in doing that. So yes, we do have a counselor in all of our schools. Their positions are really, really important to establish relationships with students proactively, to help problem solve in so many different ways, and also to manage different crises that come up in school communities. When there's a crisis that comes up in a school community, whether it's something as unfortunate as a student passing, or something that really rocks the soul of a school, the counselors are the ones that are there, right there in the middle of it, trying to determine how they can care for the needs, the social emotional needs of the students and the staff and the community, everyone who's been impacted by it. So they are important, continue to be important in our schools, and we look forward to continuing to work with our counselors and having them partner with all of these other positions, like our social workers and others that we have coming on board in our schools, so that we can provide wraparound services for our students that are easily accessible and provide the needs way beyond what we've been able to provide in the past.
Thank you. So our final section, Dr. McKnight, is restorative justice. And so for this area, would you mind sharing some of your thoughts about what restorative justice means to you within MCPS? And then we'll transition to our questions.
Yes, I will. And I will say, let's change it up for a bit. I know I have been talking a lot, and I recently just did a video, which was like a very brief video to the public that we're going to post on our website. And it really does, it's me talking about restorative justice and what it is. So I will share a very brief video, if it's okay, that can describe it, and then we can dialogue more specifically about what restorative justice is in Montgomery County Public Schools. So I did ask Mr. Cram to have that ready. So okay. Mr. Cram, if you could share that video at this time.
And how is it currently being used within MCPS? I first want to say restorative justice does not replace our code of conduct. It is a mindset and a philosophy towards school climate and relationship building in a school. It is a social justice platform that allows students to actively engage in working toward building a more positive school and classroom climate. We believe that restorative approaches positively impact the culture of classrooms and schools. Restorative approaches assist teaching and learning by providing students with the opportunity to learn from errors in judgment and take steps towards rectifying their behavior. And that's what's important.
So that would be my snippet of exactly what it is. If you like, we can proceed to the questions and I can get even more specific about our program.
Will do. So our next panelist is Ms. Brooke Holmes from Delta Sigma Theta and my chapter president. Brooke, you may ask your question to Dr. McKnight.
Thank you. Dr. McKnight, what are the goals and objectives of the MCPS Restorative Justice Program?
Thank you. So the Restorative Justice Program is an approach to building community and addressing 1, self-care, and 2, conflict resolution. And it does several things. It allows students to 1, participate in collaborating in a fostering positive classroom environment and school climate, which all of our students are responsible for contributing to. Secondly, it involves our students being able to problem solve issues and challenges that impact them, their peers, the staff, and community. And that gets to that piece of when you problem solve, it's not just about you, but it's about how you take the responsibility and what is your contribution to everyone and others who are impacted by your decisions. Third, it is about students taking responsibility for their actions. If you have worked with young people, you know that it's really important for them to have that time to reflect and think about what is my responsibility in this situation, and did it lead to any action I'm happy with or that I'm not happy with? So restorative justice does that. It also, most importantly, works to restore or repair the harm that was done as a result of someone's actions. That's really important to us because we know that students will learn, they will make mistakes, and they will in some ways make really bad decisions. What we believe is that if you find that you are able to repair the harm that was done in the situation, and you feel better and good about that, then that's going to impact you making a better decision the next time. And to me, in the service of working with students, that's how we have to see them, and that's what we have to believe. And restorative justice, finally, I'll say, focuses on relationships, responsibilities, and accountability. I emphasize the accountability piece because many confuse restorative justice with it is a process that does not have any accountability. No, when students make decisions and restorative justice is present, it does not mean that it negates the need for disciplinary consequences. So I want to be very intentional about saying that because oftentimes that is a point of confusion for others. And I'll end this question by saying we want our students to always be equipped with and apply strategies in a proactive manner so that they can make good choices and avoid repeating behaviors that do harm to others. And that's going to make them better students in our classrooms, in our schools, and outside of our schools. So when we talk about our students being community ready, this is a really big component of why this investment to us in this system is important, because we also want them to be good decision makers when they go out into the community and are serving as citizens, during MCPS and then outside of MCPS when they graduate.
Excellent. Thank you for that question, Brooke, and thank you for that answer, Dr. McKnight. And our second question in restorative justice comes from Ms. Lynn Rowe, also Delta Sigma Theta member. Ms. Rowe, you may ask your question.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Dr. McKnight. We understand that the school resource officers, or SRO, are no longer in the schools and that they've been replaced with the community engagement officers, or CEOs. So how are these positions either different or the same?
Okay, so thank you so much for that question. The school resource officer first is no longer a position within the police department or the school system. The position is now called a community engagement officer, in which we call a CEO. A few commonalities between the former SRO position and the CEO are they are both sworn uniform law enforcement officers who have background and training in emergency preparedness, crisis management, community policing, problem solving, all of those areas. The majority of our CEOs are members of the Montgomery County Police Department. However, I will say that a few of them are from other law enforcement agencies in the county, such as the Sheriff's Office, Gaithersburg City Police, Rockville City Police, all of those designations. So both were designated to serve as liaison between the police department and MCPS for police-related incidents. And over the past couple of years, we've been having the conversation within the system around how do we define police-related incidents? So they are not there to enforce MCPS rules, policies, or regulations. Most importantly, the school principal remains as the authority related to MCPS policies and discipline for students. And if the principal does find the need to require contact for police, they do that in a way that's outlined in our memorandum of understanding, in which they make contact to the police department. And that's important for us because we also recognize we need to collect data on when we're engaging our police and how do we do that. And so having our principals as a conduit to that process is really important. So I also say that arrests initiated by the police for non-school related offenses are to be addressed off campus unless there's imminent danger to the members of the community. So that's also a way that the CEO interacts that's similar to the way the SRO interacted. They will engage if there is a threat in the school. A couple of differences I will also point out to you. The CEO is not physically present in the building, in the high school building specifically on a daily basis in the way that the SRO was. In the past, high school administrators spoke directly to their SROs about incidents in their schools. Like I said, they call the police department now, and they call the non-emergency police number, depending on the circumstance, when support is needed. And that allows us to be able to better track our data and monitor how the police are engaging with schools. They also call for service to be initiated based on whatever the incident may be, that again falls under our memorandum of understanding. And I'll give you a few examples. If there's something related to hate and bias, or if they're needed for traffic support. This year, we had no idea we would need their support as much as we did with traffic support at the beginning of the school year, when everyone came back and everyone wanted to drive their children to school. And so our community was just backed up in so many different ways. And so they came out and supported. And then the CEOs also support schools in the cluster model that they're assigned to, which is a bit different from them being assigned to specific schools in the SRO model. In other words, I'll say a group of CEOs is assigned to a group of schools, and then an available CEO will respond when the school places a call for service. So that way we are still keeping the familiarity of who they are within their school community, but it's not the exact same model that we had in place before. And what we learned from our model before is we have to be very diligent in making sure that any of our programs do not cause conflict in some ways within school culture, and possibly impact our school culture in a way in which the program is not doing what it was designed or intended to do initially. And so we are looking forward to continuing to collect the data on our CEE program, and most importantly, see how it is working to help support establishing positive school cultures, but also making sure that we have safety and security at the forefront of our priorities as our students are in school, and most importantly, back in person this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. And for the entire roundtable for their questions. And we've done so well on time, Dr. McKnight, that we may be able to take a couple of community questions, if you don't mind. And
Sure.
there is one pertaining to educational equity related to the question, what implicit bias is in place, training is in place for all staff, and how is the staff held accountable? The follow-up question was, how is MCPS measuring the success of that training?
That is an excellent question. And so the way we right now measure the success of training is to one, look at who is participating in that training, and then most importantly, how is that being translated into the school? It is something that we need to develop even more. And that is based on the training that others take or our staff take within our school system. When they leave that training, being very clear about, as you take this training, this is how it should translate into your work with your students, whether it is training focused on implicit bias in the classroom. When we go in and that principal is doing observations or the administrative team are doing observations, they should be able to have comparative data to say, well, when I went to this classroom, I actually was able to see students who were not engaged before being much more engaged as a result of this teacher taking a training. Mm-hmm. And when they don't see that, most importantly, then come back and say, how do we revisit the tenets of the components that were involved in that training so that we can be responsive to the student needs? And so right now it is so much the data collection that we see who participates in the training, and we're tracking what staff and what schools are participating. The next step truly is, how does that translate into the classroom experience that's happening there in real time? And most importantly, if it's working, we should see the closing of the gaps that we do see in recommendations that are made for our courses and programs. We should see the gap closing in our student performance data. And we should also see a change in the overall environment that our students often share, are ones that are either supportive of all students, or in some cases not supportive of all students. And so we should see a significant change in that school condition and environment as a result of our staff participating in these trainings. And so that is a part that we're working on. Earlier, I mentioned our equity accountability model. The final part of that model that we did not build out prior to the pandemic that we're building out now, and our focus is to be able to do that by the end of the year, is to be able to look at the culture of a school and how that plays out in the data that we're looking at. And I see us specifically being able to utilize who is taking that training and how is that translating to what the data that we're looking at in the equity accountability model.
To follow up with that, Dr. McKnight, is there a qualitative piece to that evaluation? So you mentioned the data and seeing the gap shrink by school performance improvement, the change in the culture. What is that qualitative piece that you collect, and how is that obtained?
Yes, again, another great question. We had a reflection when we actually first started implementing the anti-racist audit, and our reflection was, we in Montgomery County Public Schools are very heavy on collecting quantitative data. It is the qualitative data that we don't have a lot of information on. And so a big focus for our anti-racist audit was to create an opportunity in each of those areas that I mentioned earlier that are involved in the audit, that outlines the audit, which is to collect qualitative data that really does speak to what are the experiences that are happening within our schools, within our offices, that we can marry up with the quantitative data to see, well, is the quantitative data close to or far apart from what the experiences are that we are going to have described for us by our staff and our students. So that is absolutely the next step of our work. And we identified that as a significant need. And so that's why we're excited about the audit. And, you know, as we talk about, you know, some have said, well, you know, with all the needs of COVID-19, is this the right time to continue with the work of the audit? Absolutely, because there isn't, there's not a good time to do this. And to your point of knowing the qualitative data, I think this is an important time to gather that.
Thank you. And I think we have time, if you are willing, one more question from the community. And so the question reads, they're a community health worker with Elevate Her and a current graduate student at Morehouse School of Medicine. How can community organizations help MCPS to better engage with parents and guardians who are largely disconnected to schools due to pandemic restrictions last year and this year?
Yes, another great question. During the pandemic, we have actually found many different ways to engage that I think we probably should have started way before the pandemic, but the pandemic actually pushed us into these spaces, which I must say I'm grateful for. A few examples of strategies that we have, or the way that we've embraced community involvement involves like pop-up shops. We recognize that much of what we've done in the past required many community members come to us, whether it is us here at Central or come to us to school to get information. And so we switched that up and said, how do we actually go out to the community and go out to the places in which our communities play, engage, and look for resources so that we can bring that to them. We also participated in a number of door knocking opportunities in which we just went and knocked on doors in our communities. And to your point, we went specifically to those communities in which we looked at the engagement data and said, you know, we're collecting information from these schools or from this part of the county. We're not seeing as many responses as we would like. So we're gonna, again, take the show on the road and go to the doors ourselves and engage. And I think our staff are going above and beyond to doing that. Another way, and I've been reflecting with the staff a lot on this, is oftentimes, and I heard someone mention this in a meeting and it just stuck with me, when we really think about convenience versus conviction when we approach our work. And in many ways, we know it's very convenient for us to put surveys out and get that information because that's what we've done. That's just how we can collect data, and it's an easy way to do it. However, when we get our survey results and we see who's responded, and we oftentimes see that it is the same communities that respond to that survey, that says the survey may work for some, but not all. So what are the other ways that we are collecting data that may not be as convenient, but may be very different so that we are engaging all of our community members, especially when we are seeking information about our next steps or the work that we have to do in the system. So we are continuing to commit to evaluate our practices internally to think about that. We have tried and have implemented successfully some new practices and look forward to engaging in many, many more. And I end with, this is why these types of forums and conversations are really important, because we also want to hear from you. Everyone here on this call is participating in this webinar because you have a strong commitment to our community and the success of our children. So if you see there is a way for us to make a connection with our community, or you may be the conduit to it, let us know. We will accept that call and engage and partner.
Is there a specific person, or is it the office of the superintendent that the community organizations should reach out to?
Well, because we coordinate so many offices and so much work, I will say a starting point for us will be my chief of staff. I'm sure he is in this this webinar, Jimmy DeAndrea. He can help coordinate that and make any direction to a specific office if there is an outreach effort that's related to a particular area or initiative.
Thank you. Thank you for this fantastic roundtable. And as we get close to our time together ending, I'm going to transition us to Dr. Keisha Addison to take us home and close us out.
Thank you, Dr. Hay. And on behalf of the Potomac Valley and Montgomery County alumni chapters of Delta Sigma Theta sororities and all of the Divine Nine organizations, I would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening for this education roundtable. I also again thank Dr. Monifa McKnight for joining us this evening to share her insights on unfinished learning, educational equity, social and emotional well-being, and restorative justice. A few other additional thank yous who made this event a success include the Office of the Superintendent, the MCPS technology team, and again, the Divine Nine organizations. During our time together this evening, we were able to gain keen insights into the way, under Dr. McKnight's leadership, the Montgomery County Public School System is focused on serving students during this COVID-19 pandemic. With regard to unfinished learning, Dr. McKnight clarified that in the district, the phrase used is learning disruption. And she shared with us how the learning disruption due to the pandemic impacted not only the youngest learners, but also students receiving free and reduced price meal system services. She highlighted the importance of allowing the data to guide the work to help students. And during this portion of the discussion, Dr. McKnight highlighted there are 6 strategies to mitigate learning loss. Dr. McKnight also shared ways that the Divine Nine organizations and other organizations can collaborate with MCPS, including mentoring and internships, to name a few, as well as partnering to support their out-of-school time initiative. And speaking about the strategies related to educational equity, Dr. McKnight talked about access and opportunity to support things such as advanced coursework, data and accountability to monitor disaggregated student data, and professional learning for staff to meet the needs of students. We learned that counselors play an essential role in the social and emotional well-being of students, and how their role in supporting has shifted during the pandemic, and how counselors provide information to students and families about academic opportunities and community resources. And finally, in our conversation about restorative justice, we were able to learn more about the community engagement officers, who are sworn uniform law enforcement officers with essential training. And they serve as a liaison between the police department and MCPS for police-related incidents. As a collective of service-oriented organizations, we look forward to collaborating with the district to meet not only the academic needs, but also the social and emotional needs of the diverse students of Montgomery County. And if we could put up the last slide, please. And again, we thank you for attending this roundtable discussion, educational roundtable discussion. And so we ask that you please take a few minutes to provide us feedback on this session by completing the survey. You can scan the QR code on the screen. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and have a great night.